Everything changed inside Tom O's barn loft, and the truth about what they found up there has left the entire town on edge. Before we delve into what was lurking in the shadows above that old barn, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, as what happened next is something that no one can explain. It began with a quiet morning and a strange stillness around Tom's property. The kind of calm that makes people stop in their tracks. Neighbors said they saw a faint light moving through the cracks in the barn wall. Even though no one had seen Tom step outside for days, the deeper they looked, the more they realized something was amiss, as if something was waiting. The day began quietly, unlike every previous day, as if the air itself was hiding something. The barn at the edge of Tom Moor's property sat still, its wooden walls aged and gray to show that time had made its mark. The doors were closed, as always, but that morning, something felt wrong, and everyone could sense it. The air waited, as if the place was holding its breath. The neighbors were the first to notice, something like a low hum of movement around the barn that wasn't there before. No one saw Tom step out of the house, and no smoke rose from the chimney to signify he was up. All they caught sight of was a single lantern flickering through a crack in the boards, though the sun was already high. By midday, word had spread that something was happening inside. A few locals and Tom's neighbors, feeling uneasy but curious, came by to check on him. They found the main gate unlatched, which was something Tom never did. The ground was also disturbed, with several sets of footprints leading in and out of the barn, too numerous to belong to one person. Someone said they heard faint thuds from within the premises, as if something heavy was being dragged or lifted. Another claimed the sound wasn't just movement, but muffled voices, whispers that were low and deliberate. One of the men tried to call out Tom's name, but got no response. So he pushed the door slightly open, and a rush of cold, stale air escaped from inside, carrying the smell of old hay and something else he couldn't name. Inside was a darkness that was thick and heavy, alive in its intensity. The lantern's light flickered again, then went out completely. They stepped back, unsure what to do. No one wanted to enter without Tom's word. He was known to be private, almost secretive, about his space. But something in that barn was different now. It no longer felt like a place to keep tools or saddles. It felt as if something had shifted beneath it, as if the ground itself was uneasy. By nightfall, the whispers had turned into rumors. Some said Tom had uncovered something buried up there. Others swore they saw movement through the slits in the barn wall, a figure pacing slowly back and forth. The unease grew rapidly, until curiosity began to outweigh fear. And as darkness swallowed the fields, a single question remained in the cold air. What exactly was going on inside Tom's barn? And why did no one see him come out again? By the next morning, the barn stood untouched. The air was still. The fields were empty. Even the animals kept their distance. The neighbors who had gathered the day before were now gone. But their unease remained, like the chill of the night before. The door, which had been slightly open, was now firmly closed again, and no one knew who shut it. The next day brought no signs of movement, no footsteps in the dirt, no smoke from the nearby house. Tom's truck sat in the same spot, halfway covered in leaves and dust. Someone reported knocking on his door that morning, but got no response. He added that the sound of the knock seemed to echo for too long, as if the walls were hollow. And when he called out Tom's name, the wind answered first, carrying only the soft creak of the barn door's hinges. By midday, the quiet started to feel wrong. A few people came back, drawn by the stillness they couldn't explain. They spoke in whispers, glancing at the loft window. a small square opening covered in cobwebs. Behind it, they saw something dark shift. It wasn't clear if it was a shadow or someone standing there, but the longer they stared, the more certain they became. Something was up there, watching them. So they waited for hours, thinking Tom would appear, maybe walk out and explain what was going on. But no one came. The sun began to sink, and still there was no sound from inside. Not even the wind dared to move through the trees. It was as though the place had fallen out of rhythm with the rest of the world. Too quiet, too heavy. That night, a few men brought lanterns and stood outside the barn. They didn't go in, but they listened. At first, they heard nothing. Everywhere was too quiet. Then, a faint dragging sound came from above. Slow, deliberate, like something being pulled across the floor. The men froze. The sound stopped the moment one of them stepped closer. They turned to leave, but one man swore he heard a whisper from behind the door, a voice, low and tired, saying just one word: "Don't." They didn't wait to see who said it. They hurried back to their houses. By dawn, the barn was alone again, but that word stayed in their minds, echoing in the silence that refused to lift, reminding them that something was inside that loft, and it was something that didn't want to be disturbed. The following evening, the silence was broken, but not in the way anyone expected. It happened just past sunset, when two locals, curious beyond reason, decided to step closer to the barn. They brought a lantern and the uneasy courage that comes when fear turns into obsession. The air was damp and heavy with the smell of rain. As they neared the barn door, the wooden planks creaked softly beneath their boots, echoing into the stillness, as if giving warning. They stopped and listened for any sign someone was inside. At first, only the rustle of dry hay through the cracks. Then came a sound, faint but unmistakable, a slow, dragging creak above their heads. Steady, rhythmic, like someone pacing carefully across the loft floor. They exchanged a look, half disbelief, half dread. One whispered that maybe Tom had returned, but neither could bring themselves to call his name. The sound continued, with every step, a pause, a creak. The boards overhead strained with each shift of weight. Then, silence, louder than before, the kind that burns into your ears with a siren's hush, because it's too deep. They held their breath, waiting, and it came, softer this time, like the shuffle of boots across straw. As the lantern flickered, they saw small flecks of dust drifting down from the loft beams, floating through the narrow beam of light. Proof that something was moving up there. One man, heart pounding so loud he could hear it in his ears, raised the lantern higher, aiming the glow toward the loft. The light caught something, not clearly, but enough to make his breath hitch. He stumbled backward. It was a shape, standing still, watching. The other waited for an explanation, but none came. His friend moved slightly to see better, but it was too dark to make out a face. He knew it was there, motionless in the far corner of the loft. The man stumbled back again. The light trembled with his hand. In that instant, the figure shifted slightly, then disappeared into the dark, as if it had melted into the walls. The barn went completely silent again. The only sound was the creak of the rafters, adjusting to the night's chill. The two men backed away slowly, unwilling to turn their backs on the place. The air felt colder now, as if something had exhaled from within the barn. Something that had been holding still for far too long. When they finally reached the gate, one of them looked back. Through the upper window of the loft, he saw it again. A faint glow, like a lantern moving slowly from one side to the other. And he remembered. no one living had gone inside these past few days. Everyone in the small Montana town knew one rule about Tom's place. No one went near the loft. Not friends, not neighbors, not even family. The few who'd been inside the barn said Tom never spoke of what he kept up there. And when someone once asked, he'd just shake his head and change the subject. So when those two men swore they saw a figure and a moving lantern inside, it wasn't just strange, it was impossible. By the next morning, a quiet tension hung over the property. More people arrived, drawn by the story spreading through town. They stood in clusters near the fence, whispering, watching the barn as if it might move on its own. The loft window looked the same, a square of glass clouded by years of dust. Yet more than one person claimed to see something behind it. One said it looked like a handprint pressed faintly against the grime on the inside. Another swore the curtains, though torn and stiff, had shifted slightly, as if someone had brushed past them. The sheriff was called. He responded reluctantly. He didn't like to meddle in Tom's affairs. But when a man disappears and strange sounds echo through his barn, even silence demands attention. He stepped inside first, flashlight cutting through the darkness in a smooth arc. Dust rose with every step. The beam caught tools, saddles, and the rough outline of a ladder leading up to the loft. The ladder looked older than the barn itself. Its rungs were darkened with age and something else. Stains, maybe? Too old to tell. He called out Tom's name. No response. Only the faint sway of the ladder as the light brushed against it. For a moment, the silence seemed to deepen, as if the walls were listening. Then came a single, sharp sound. One creak from above. Not the ladder. A footstep. He froze, aiming the light upward. Nothing but dust trickled down, landing softly on his shoulders. The sound came again, slower this time, moving across the loft. The sheriff waited for whatever was up there to reveal itself. One hand rested on the ladder. His light searched the darkness. From above, something fell. Not large, but enough to make him flinch. It hit the ground beside his boot with a hollow thud. He checked. It was a rope, frayed, knotted at one end, and still warm to the touch. The sheriff stepped back, his face pale. He whispered something no one else could hear. When he walked out, he shut the barn door and told everyone the same thing Tom always did. Don't go up there. For 2 full days, no one went near the barn. The sheriff's warning lingered in everyone's mind. But so did the image of that rope, old, knotted, and still warm when it touched the floor. None of it made sense. But curiosity has a way of wearing people down. On the 3rd night, sky dull gray, air heavy with the scent of rain, one man decided he had to see for himself what was hidden in that loft. He went alone, with no light but a small lantern, its glow barely strong enough to cut through the dust. The barn doors groaned softly as he pushed them open. Every sound seemed too loud in that silence. The hinges, the creak of his boots, the faint flap of something loose above him. He called out softly, half hoping for no reply. And luckily, there was none. Only the hollow echo of his own voice. The ladder stood where it always had, leaning into the shadows of the loft. He hesitated, then started to climb. Each rung felt brittle beneath his weight. With every step, the air grew colder. Dust drifted down, coating his hands, clinging to his jacket. When he reached the top, he lifted the lantern and froze. The floor was covered in decades of dust, thick enough to muffle footsteps. But something was wrong. Near the center of the loft, he saw a trail of prints, fresh, clear, leading toward the far wall. He climbed fully into the loft and followed them, breath shallow, light trembling. The prince stopped near a pile of hay bales stacked unevenly against the boards. One looked recently moved, the dust around it unsettled. He reached out and pushed the bale aside. A smell hit him first, sharp, earthy, almost metallic. Behind it was a small wooden hatch built into the floor. The edges were marked by hand tools, as if opened and closed many times. His hand shook violently with fear as he reached for the latch. It gave way easily, too easily, like it had been waiting for him. He lifted the hatch. A wave of cold air rose through the opening, thick with the scent of damp wood and something older, deeper. The lantern flickered, catching something below. A space hidden beneath the loft, dug deep and narrow. Something glinted faintly in the darkness. Before he could see more, the lantern dimmed suddenly, and the sound came from behind him. Slow, deliberate, just like before. He spun around, light flaring, but there was nothing. Just dust swirling where something might have stood moments ago. The hatch slammed shut on its own, hard enough to shake the floorboards. He stumbled down the ladder, dropped the lantern, and ran out into the night without looking back. The next morning, he spread the news of what he'd seen. By the time the story of the hidden hatch reached town, no one could ignore the barn anymore. The sheriff tried to keep people away, but the fear of what might still be inside mixed with the need to know the truth. A small group gathered at first light, bringing ropes, lanterns, and the kind of steady determination that comes when too many unanswered questions hang over a place. No one wanted to climb that ladder alone, so they went in together, steps slow and careful. The air inside was colder than the morning outside. Dust floated lazily through beams of light slicing in from the cracks. The ladder stood as before. One man tested the first rung. It held. One by one, they climbed. The old wood squeaked under their weight. When the last man stepped onto the loft floor, the only sounds were their breathing and the faint scratching of hay shifting under their boots. They spread out with lanterns, searching for the hatch the first visitor swore he saw. At first, nothing but dust so thick it looked like it had been collecting for ages. Then someone noticed a strange patch, a small square where the dust was thinner, as if brushed aside. He knelt and tapped the boards. A hollow sound echoed, making everyone freeze. There was something under there. They worked their fingers into the cracks, pulling together until the boards loosened. When the hatch finally lifted, a cold breath of air rushed upward. The lanterns flickered. Beneath them lay a narrow pit, carved out carefully, almost tenderly, as though someone had spent years shaping it. It went deeper than any of them expected. One man lowered his lantern slowly into the space. At first, the light revealed only soil and wood. Then, something caught the glow. A corner of an object wrapped in clean cloth, standing out starkly against the dirt. They tied a rope around one man's waist and lowered him in. His boots scraped the walls as he descended. At the bottom, he crouched and brushed away the dirt around the wrapped object. It was heavier than it looked. He lifted it gently and called for the rope. The men above pulled together, the rope straining as the object rose toward the loft. When it reached the top, they placed it on the floor. The cloth was tied tightly, as if someone had wanted to ensure nothing inside could move. One man reached forward, hands shaking, and loosened the first knot. The cloth fell open slowly. For a moment, no one spoke. The thing inside wasn't large, but the sight of it pulled the air from their lungs. It looked old, worn, and marked by something none of them could name. Just as someone tried to whisper a question, a dull thud echoed from below the hatch. One firm knock against the wood. A warning. A reminder that whatever they pulled out was never meant to leave that place. The men staggered back, gripping their lanterns, eyes locked on the pit they'd just opened. Nothing else moved. The loft fell back into silence, but no one felt safe. Not with that thing lying at their feet, not with the pit below breathing out cold air that didn't seem to stop. The lanterns shook, casting wild shadows as the men circled the object slowly, boots sinking into dust undisturbed for years. The first man who dared to kneel beside it stretched out a trembling hand, not to lift it, not to turn it, only to brush away a thin layer of dirt clinging to its edges. As he did, a faint mark became visible beneath the grime, carved with intention. The curves and lines formed a symbol none of them recognized, yet the moment they saw it, a strange heaviness settled in their chests. One man backed away, whispering they needed to put it back. Another said it looked like something meant to stay buried. Before they could argue further, the loft floor groaned suddenly. The boards around the hatch trembled, as if something below had shifted its weight. A cold draft rose from the pit, colder than before, almost icy, carrying the smell of damp earth and something that made their skin prickle. The man closest to the hatch stepped back fast, nearly tripping. He pointed to the boards, voice thin and strained. The dust around the opening was moving, not drifting, but pushing upward, as if something beneath was breathing. Then came the second shock, a soft, low, drawn-out sound rising from the pit, like someone taking a breath, but not human, not animal, something in between, tired, heavy, and aware of them. Every man froze. No one dared blink. The lantern lights wavered, as if reacting to the sound. One whispered Tom's name, foolishly hoping for an answer. The sound stopped. For one heartbeat. Stillness. Then the object at their feet shifted, just enough to make the cloth slide slightly. Every man saw it, and not one could deny it. In that small, slow motion, something inside the cloth thudded gently, like it had its own pulse. They stumbled backward. Some grabbed the ladder, ready to flee. No one reached for the object again, not even to cover it. The loft felt smaller now, walls closing in, air too dense. One man whispered they should leave before the thing in the pit rose again. Another insisted they couldn't leave the object out in the open, but none stepped forward to touch it. Not after seeing it move. It was clear now. Whatever Tom had hidden up there was not meant for daylight, and certainly not for their hands. Yet it was out, and something buried deep beneath the loft had noticed. By the next morning, word had spread across town. Something had been found in Tom's loft. Wrapped, carved, breathing, with a pulse that didn't belong to anything they could name. But the strangest part wasn't the object. It was Tom's absence. Days had passed. No one had seen him walk the road, tend the horses, or step onto his porch. His house remained locked, curtains drawn tight. His truck sat untouched. It was as if he'd vanished before anyone noticed he was gone. A small group returned to his property at dawn, hoping to find him, or at least a trace of where he'd gone. The barn looked the same, but the air around it felt wrong, heavy, watching. The loft window, once covered in dust, now showed a smear across the glass, a long, uneven streak, like a hand dragging along the inside. The men stood still, breath hanging in the cold air. They called Tom's name again and again, but received no answer. Not from him, not from the barn, not even from the wind. One suggested checking the woods behind the house. Another warned not to wander far, given what they'd heard in the pit the day before. They searched the tree line, scanned the creek bed, checked Tom's usual trails. They found only one set of footprints, a faint trail leading to the barn, and stopping right at the door. No prints led away. When they circled the barn again, one man spotted something wedged beneath the lower boards, fabric, torn and darkened by dirt. It looked like part of a shirt Tom often wore, ripped at the edges as if snagged by something sharp or pulled too fast. The sight drained the color from their faces. They crouched, but didn't touch it. A lesson learned from the day before. Their eyes drifted up to the loft, the hatch, the pit, the thing that breathed. One whispered maybe Tom had tried to hide the object again before it moved. Another suggested he'd gone up there alone, or maybe never made it back down. The others stepped away instinctively. The thought settled over them like a weight they couldn't carry. If Tom had gone into that loft alone, where was he now? The question lingered. The floorboards above remained still and silent. Yet the sense of being watched tightened around them. Before they left, one man turned back and swore he saw a shadow pass behind the loft window. Not fast, slow, controlled, as if someone stood just out of view. He called Tom's name softly. The window darkened, and the barn responded. Not with wind, not with age, but with a long, deep creak, as something shifted its weight inside. The men backed away until the barn faded behind the trees, each step heavier than the last. Tom was gone. His trail ended at the loft, and whatever moved inside that barn now was not giving him back.